Tales from the Pizzaplex. It's an endless debate. By now, I feel like it'll never end. You know, because that's what endless means. The theorist community just can't seem to agree. Are the Tales from the Pizzaplex stories in the game's timeline, or are they in a separate timeline? Oh, and that's not even getting into Fazbear Frights. But the thing with both is that whether or not they are in the game's timeline doesn't matter. Or at least not for this video. Rather, what matters is the fact that the games are in them. And that causes problems. See, the Tales and Frights stories seem to have some flaws. Whether or not they fit in the games doesn't matter. The problem is that they don't seem to align with themselves, nor do they seem to align with each other. What do I mean by that? Well, stick around as I venture into a probably pretty controversial topic. Is the FNaF timeline broken? Well, let's find out. To start off, let's talk about the most important thing you need to understand before you watch this video. Whether the books are in the games or not, the games are in the books. This is absolutely not up for debate. We know this for a fact. It does call into question what the issue is with the books being in the games, because the games being in the books means they absolutely can fit cleanly. Or kind of, but that's besides the point. It's simply the truth. The games happen in both Fazbear Frights and in Tales from the Pizzaplex. And we know this because of one very specific game, FNaF 6. In the Fazbear Frights epilogues, there's a build-up towards some big fire that happened a long time ago. We end up learning that the fire involved one of the original owners of Freddy's, and that the puppet animatronic was in the evidence bag of things from the fire. This is the FNaF 6 fire. The original Freddy's owner in question is Henry Emily, who was responsible for the fire, and the puppet is there because she was in Lefty, who burned in the FNaF 6 fire. We also know that this wasn't the FNaF 3 fire, because during the epilogues the puppet and William Afton spirits are freed, so they wouldn't still be around by FNaF 6. We also learn in the Ultimate Guide that the epilogues do in fact follow the events of FNaF 6, with the evidence bag being from the wreckage of the fire. So FNaF 6 happened in the Fazbear Frights timeline. On top of that, we also know Sister Location to have happened. Room for One More seems to take place after Sister Location, as Stanley's in charge of making sure nothing escapes, indicating the fun times as Ennard have already escaped, which is also why he never interacts with them during his time working there. If FNaF 6 and Sister Location happened, the rest of the games must have as well, since FNaF 4 connects to Sister Location, FNaF 3 is right before FNaF 6, and FNaF 1 and 2 are the cause of the phantoms in FNaF 3. So the FNaF games had to have happened in Fazbear Frights. And just in general, FNaF 6 is the culmination of events. It happening without the previous FNaF games happening would be like if Infinity War and Endgame happened without the rest of the MCU. It just wouldn't work. And the same goes for Tales from the Pizzaplex. Tales begins for the exact same reason Security Breach does, because the FNaF 6 location burned down. The Pizzaplex is built over the burnt down FNaF 6 location. FNaF 6 happened in Tales from the Pizzaplex, and as I just said, that means all the previous games happened as well. The point is that even if the books don't take place in the game's timeline, the games take place in the book's timeline, which causes many problems. These aren't problems with the books being in the game's timeline, it's just a problem with the books themselves. I can understand not wanting the books to be in the games because they don't really make sense, but if the games are in the books anyway, then the books being in the games doesn't really change anything. The point I'm going to be trying to address in this video is that Scott is one man. Obviously he's had help with the story in more recent years with Steel Wool, but for the most part he's written the story himself, and he's told us that there are no holes in the story, only holes in our understanding. But is that actually true? Well, let's talk about these timeline issues and see if there's a way to make them work. So what's the problem? Edwin. Just everything about Edwin. Not him being a parallel to Henry, no. If that's even intended, it doesn't cause any problems. As I said, FNaF 6 happens in this universe, and Edwin is still alive after FNaF 6, meaning Henry and Edwin coexist and are not the same character of alternate universes. No, what causes problems is Edwin's actual timeline, beginning to end. See, the Mimic's story takes place when Edwin is 24, right? And then in the Storyteller he's 64, so there's a 40-year difference, right? Well, yes, but some people think otherwise for some reason. I got a comment on a video a while ago saying that Edwin was actually 28 in the Storyteller, and that it only referred to the first 24 years of his life, referencing the time before David was born. But that's not true. The exact quote is, "For nearly all of Edwin's 24 years of life, he loved building things." So yeah, Edwin is in fact 24. However, the main debate on Edwin's timeline is when he started his business. It is stated that Edwin bought the abandoned factory he lives in 5 years prior to this story in order to house his new business, indicating that is when he actually started that business. It is also said that Edwin got his first patent when he was a college student, indicating that was also about 5 years prior when he was about 19, or maybe earlier when he was like 18 or 17 at the earliest. But it is also stated that this allowed him to start his business right out of school, most likely referring to high school rather than college, as that would screw up his timeline even more, which indicates he started his robotics business when he was around 18 or 19, and then bought the factory to house it when he was 19. This is not what causes problems. What does cause problems is that it is said that Edwin started his business in the early 70s. The latest that could mean is 1974, and the earliest the story could be is 6 years later in 1980. This definitely causes some problems. As I said before, the storyteller is exactly 40 years after the Mimic, which would place it in 2020. But this is after the Pizzaplex opens, and therefore after FNaF 6. So how does that work if FNaF 6 is to take place in 2023? Does it just not? There's a couple ways to make the Mimic's place in the timeline work, but neither of them totally work in general. The first is actually an idea told to me by one of my friends a while ago, though honestly I don't really know whether he was joking or not. The idea is basically that when it says Edwin started his business in the early 70s, it was actually referring to the 2070s, not the 1970s. It's kind of implied in the epilogues that the pizza place may have burned down a while ago, though it's never 100% specified, only really saying it's an old restaurant, which could also be referring to the location previously being Fredbear's if that theory is to be true. However, if the location did burn down a long time ago, the Mimic being in the 2070s would kinda make sense. It would also make perfect sense with the Stitchline stories. Pretty much my only real issue with the Stitchline stories taking place in the game's timeline is the timing. Previously, I believed the Mimic story to take place in 1984, due to the fact that Edwin was turning costumes into animatronics, indicating it to be after Fredbear's closed and during Freddy's lifespan. That would place the storyteller and the opening of the Pizzaplex in 2024, and with FNaF 6 in 2023 and Clethophobia showing the Pizzaplex to be built by December, that leaves only a few months for the Pizzaplex to be built. Many people think this is implausible, but similar things have happened in real life, so while it's pretty wild, it's definitely possible. If the Stitchline stories were in the games, they'd have to be after FNaF 6, but before the Pizzaplex opens. A few months is not enough time for all that to happen, especially since some of the stories are quite a while after FNaF 6. That's why in the past I opted for the idea of the timeline splitting after FNaF 6, one branch leading to the Stitchline and the other leading to the modern FNaF games timeline with Help Wanted 1, 2, AR, and Security Breach. However, the issue of the timing is mitigated by the Mimic taking place in the 2070s, but this would then place Security Breach in the 2110s, which is really far in the future. Sure, it's possible, but it's a bit far-fetched. But the biggest problem with the Mimic being in the 2070s is the very concept of what Edwin is doing. He is turning Fazbear costumes into actual animatronics. It's implied with the recent carnival stuff that Fazbear Entertainment started with just costumes, and the Mimic story shows the costumes being turned into animatronics, implying the actual animatronics are the costumes transformed. That implies the Mimic is towards the beginning of the timeline, which also doesn't work under the 2070s idea, so I don't think that works. The other theory is more plausible, but also doesn't make a lot of sense to me. For a little while now, a popular idea to make more stuff fit in between FNaF 6 and Security Breach is placing FNaF 3 in 2015. Not only is this the year the game released, but it is stated that the game is 30 years after Freddy's closed. Most people believe this is referring to the last time Freddy's was open, which was FNaF 1 in 1993, but some people believe this is referring to the first Freddy's, which closed in 1985, and so 30 years later would be 2015. By extension, theories indicate FNaF 6 either also takes place in 2015 or possibly 2017, the year FNaF 6 also released. But there's a couple things I find problematic about this. First of all, I don't think it really makes sense that 30 years after Freddy's closed its doors is referring to the first Freddy's, because Freddy still existed for years after that. I think it only really makes sense to be referring to the last time Freddy shut down, that being FNaF 1. I think FNaF 3 being in 2015 is kind of plausible, but it doesn't really make as much sense to me as it being in 2023. FNaF 6 is where I have more issues though, mostly due to HRY223, the message in the Insanity ending. I think it's clear that HRY223 means Henry 2023, indicating FNaF 6 to be in 2023. Some people have suggested that 223 being the year 2023 doesn't make sense because why would a year be written with a missing number, and instead it makes more sense to be a date, February 23rd. However, this ignores the fact that we know HRY is referring to Henry, and it's literally missing a very important consonant. So 223 meaning 2023 is not far-fetched at all, because how would HRY mean Henry when there's no N in there? Not to mention, 223 matches perfectly with the year we were previously assigning to FNaF 3, 2023, and this game is after FNaF 3, and I'm supposed to believe that's just a coincidence? That doesn't make sense to me. This option is definitely more plausible than the 2070s option, but it still doesn't make much sense to me, and so Edwin's timeline in general doesn't make sense to me. Some of you will say this is evidence that Tails is not in the game's timeline, but as I said earlier, this is not the case. As I said already, whether Tails is in the games or not, the games are still in Tails. FNaF 6 still happened, meaning the previous games did too, and so even if Tails isn't in the games, it still has to align with the FNaF games up to and including FNaF 6 at the minimum, but it doesn't. This is not a problem with Tails being in the games, it is simply a problem with Tails, and by extension, it is probably a problem with the game's timeline as well. So, is the timeline broken? Seemingly. But who knows? Maybe there's another way to make all this work that I haven't thought of, or maybe I missed something that can allow the timeline to remain consistent. If you guys can think of any solutions, let me know in the comments, but if you did enjoy this video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe if you want to, and I'll see you all in the next video, and hopefully I'm not sick by then. I don't know if my voice was annoying in this video, I hope not. Sorry if it was though, but yeah, I'm a little sick right now. Sorry about that. But yeah, I'll see you guys later. Bye guys!